Good afternoon or morning or wherever you're tuning in from today. Welcome to Thrive IT, the THRIVEcast, coming to you live at the moment, and I'm sure recorded soon enough. My name is DJ Eshelman, and I just clicked a button I didn't want to click, but it had the same results. We'll go with it. Speaking of buttons with results, I want to introduce today's affiliate sponsor. That is Krisp. And the way we always do this is by demonstrating the fact that I have an air conditioner running right now. And my super high gain microphone is usually picking that up. And if I turn off Krisp right here, usually you can hear the background noise. If I turn it back on, no background noise. So it's been cool for me. And I'm sure it'll be cool for you in your conference calls and such like that. Give it a try. ThriveIT.com/Krisp. We get a little kickback as an affiliate. You get the same exact price as you normally would if you buy, but you can try it on us. So that's kind of cool. So anyway, that out of the way, let me welcome my co-host, Jeff Pitch, in 3, 2, 1.
Hello. After 2 weeks away,
Oh, Jeff is back to barely hearing Jeff today. He's having some technical difficulties. I'll let you know what software he's not using today.
Yeah, is that not any better?
Slightly.
Let me see. How's that? Any better?
Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. So let's bring on our guest today. We have the president of, let me get this label here, Cloud9, Andy Paul, right here in the house with us in 3, 2, 1. Hey, Andy.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
Going well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself, or I can keep introducing you more if you really want to.
Yeah, I mean, do I start with how good looking I am, or how great I am, how good of a guy I am? I mean, what's the best way to start here, DJ? It's your show. I mean, I want to, follow your.
I'm going to go with the good looking part myself.
I don't blame you. Most people do. So, yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. So, for anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Andy Paul. I am the president of Cloud9 Services. We are a white label consulting firm. I've been in the IT consulting, specifically the Citrix realm, for a long time. I know DJ and I have worked together for 5-6 years at this point. Jeff and I go back probably closer to 10 years. Spent many days in opposing cubicles on conference calls. Different companies, same customer, but so we like a lot of people in this industry, we all know each other from whether it's engagements or conferences or webinars or books or blogs. Names float around, and so you may have heard of me, you may not. I take no offense either way. Just believe the good stuff and none of the bad.
Is it true you can't trust a man with 2 first names? Is that accurate?
That is absolutely true. Never trust a man with 2 first names.
Tech guy says hello. Hello, tech guy.
Cool. That's the good thing about Andy. He can take it and dish it out just as good as anybody.
That's half the fun right there, man.
Yep.
Exactly. Very cool. Well, Andy, get us started a little bit. Tell us about kind of early life Andy Paul, and then we'll build up to where you are today.
Sure. So earliest life, the thing probably most people don't even know about me is my original career goals and my college degree is actually in law enforcement. So I started off as a policing major in college and then shifted from police administration into computer security, which led me into IT. So even within that realm, kind of been a jack of all trades throughout my career. So I have started off as, I had a programming background from college, but I didn't want to be a code monkey. I have lots of friends that are, and that's great for them. That just wasn't the fit for me. So I floated around a while, jumping from really a recruitment company to training. I was a trainer for executive training for a while, which I really enjoyed, but liked the role, not necessarily some of the company politics. So shifted from there and actually took a development position with another company for a while doing SQL and database development. So which I really enjoyed. And I always say if I had to pick one background that describes me, it's really data analyst. Everything I do comes down to data. So data, evidence, analysis work. And I use it all the time, even with running Cloud9, because I'm constantly looking at whether it's performance metrics of projects or reviewing surveys or running financial reports. It all comes down to data analysis for what I do. So I still say that's really my core. I joke that for a long time I tried to avoid what I call being pigeonholed into Citrix. I didn't want to be, quote, the Citrix guy.
Right.
Of course, 20 years later, I'm part of the Citrix CTA program. I wrote a book on Citrix, and I've kind of become the Citrix guy for the past 10, 12 years. You had Carl on here one time in web, calls himself the accidental Citrix admin. And I think it's the same for a lot of us that, wherever we end up at, that's not necessarily was the target when we started. I mean, even within consulting, most consultants that I know didn't start with an IT background. Maybe in business or accounting or psychology. I've had a few that started, in art, whether it was, graphic design or even just visual arts. And so like everybody else, you gravitate toward things that draw your interest, whether it's, and for me, it's problem solving. I've always enjoyed problem solving, so I'll focus on that even within technology. So I say we're there to solve the problems, not necessarily deploy the technology. Of course, if the technology solves the problem, even better.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So actually, it's kind of funny you mentioned the database things. That's actually one of my earliest memories of our interaction. Was you had created a documentation database, essentially. Yeah, looking through the old IMA data and pulling out basically a document of the environment. And so that was I'm trying to remember what year that was.
That would have been, let's see, Jeff, when we were in Chicago together, because that's actually where I developed it at. That had been about 8 years ago, probably about 2012, maybe.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Maybe
somewhere in that neighborhood. So what DJ's referring to is a program role called ZenApp Audit. What I'd found in doing consulting is I was constantly going in and asking the same questions, looking at the same data. And this was before the 7X generation, so 6.5 was the latest version at the time. And I had just enough of a scripting background and a database background. I'm like, well, if I could just take all this IMA data and dump it into my own database, then I can sort it and filter it and look at it in different ways. And so I created the utility, like a lot of us do in the industry, especially all of the community partners. I created something that was useful for me. And because it worked for me, I figured it might be useful for other people. So it's actually out there. I don't plug my website because I don't put anything on there anymore, but paultechnologies.com. If you want to find it, you can go out there. It's free. It's based on Microsoft Access. It's a runtime executable, and it can generate fancy, cross-tab reports and kick out to Excel. Because I found with, looking at customers, especially larger customers that had, say 1,000 published apps, trying to find where those apps were published against and all the policies, you couldn't do it. So, doing a health check or an audit of a company, you'd pick maybe 10%. I was like, well, why give me 10% when I can do 100%? So I took the time to, and again, it kind of comes back to that data analysis standpoint of, I needed the data so I could analyze it. And so that was the first step, was finding a way to collect all the data and put it into a method that I could analyze, which for me is, I still use Access all the time. I know it's kind of the redheaded stepchild of databases, but it's easy, it's lightweight, and you get a lot of programmability out of it. So
you go with what works for you. It's kind of there's well, I never really liked that analogy. There's multiple ways to skin a cat. It's kind of a little brutal, but there are.
Well, I think it's funny you bring up Access, because when I was working at a hospital, one of my first real jobs, the doctors would develop stuff in Access, and suddenly you're going to upgrade Office, and you can't, at least not the Access piece of it, because it would break their functionality. And doctors, being doctors at a hospital, they rule the roost. And that put a kibosh on quite a few projects that I can recall about that. It's crazy stuff.
It's true. It's true. So databases, Citrix, how did that journey progress to, well, spoiler alert, there's a book as well, but how did that progression work then? How did we get from point A to point B?
It's a good question. So I was working, after I spent about a year and a half doing technical training, we joke about Access. Actually, that was one of the things I taught was Microsoft Access. And so a local manufacturing firm had some older Access applications. This was before Y2K that wasn't compatible, and they were needing upgrades. So they contracted me to come and do some upgrades. And talking to the sponsor there, who ended up becoming one of my long-term mentors, he was one of those casual situations that we've all had where he was not necessarily looking to hire somebody, but needed somebody to come in. And I wasn't specifically looking to leave, but I was open to the discussion. And it became a very casual, would you be interested? Well, how would it work out? And so we, handshake deal kind of worked out, and went to go work for this local manufacturing firm. But the funny thing is, I go in on my first day and say, yeah, I'm here to start my job. Who are you? They had no paperwork, no knowledge of it. They didn't know who I was. So a little bit of a scramble on that day one. But so I was there for about 5 years. And this company, unfortunately was going downhill just from a financial perspective. They were being absorbed into a national partner. And so, I saw the writing on the wall. They were going to be closing. And so while I was there, my original focus was on databases. And then we had a team of about 7 in the IT department. And over time, layoffs started happening, as we've all been on both sides of. And I had just enough background in networking that they said, well, we don't need the network admin anymore. We'll give it to Andy. And then we don't need a web developer anymore. We'll give it to Andy. And we don't need a help desk anymore. We'll give it to Andy. Now, I didn't get the salaries of the people. I just got the responsibilities. But one of the things that we had deployed while I was there was we had developed quite a few Access applications. And then manufacturing, they wanted to get away from having computers on the floor. We're looking at thin clients, early day of Wise terminals. And so we deployed Citrix, with help of a local consulting firm, a little two node Citrix farm. It's been Metaframe XP days. So, it's a bit a while ago. And so I had just enough Citrix that when I was ready to leave there, a local software company was looking for a senior network administrator. And a lot of what they were doing is they were custom developing software and then hosting it on Citrix. So they were basically an MSP or a CSP before those things existed. They were pretty much software as a service, but it was thick client software, so it was hosted on Citrix. So they needed somebody with the Citrix background. So I had just enough that when I went in and interviewed, I landed it. So it was nice because it kept me in town. And I was responsible for all networking and hosting the company. And we grew our data center footprints and had to learn more and more Citrix because of it. And I even had a team that did most of the day-to-day work, but again, oversight and staff turnovers, and you pick up things along the way. And it was one of those things that when I left there is when I ended up going into consulting. I went to work for a Citrix partner, and of course it blew up from there as far as how much Citrix I was doing.
Right. Always does.
So I kind of backed into the Citrix world, starting off as a programmer and then moving into more just overall client server system networking admin, and then honed back in onto Citrix from there.
Very cool. Very cool. So, and I'm trying to remember, were you always in the Kentucky area for all this, or were you moving around at all?
No, I've been lucky in that, born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, and then went to school away but in state. So went to college at Eastern Kentucky University, and then came back to Louisville after I graduated, mainly because I was looking around for jobs, and my wife, who was my fiance at the time, I hadn't planned on coming back to Louisville. She was like, there's more opportunities there. There's more chances for you to get something that you want to do. So, and then I've really been here ever since. As long as I've been willing to get in a car or hop on a plane, which granted nobody's doing right now, but as long as I've been willing to travel, it's been fine. I've never been opposed to moving. I've just been lucky enough. I've never had to relocate for work.
Hey, that's nice. That's the beauty of our work sometimes,
A lot of benefits to that. And it's nice too because I have extended family in the area. So when my kids were much younger, that was very helpful. Now they're all teenagers, so they don't care about this or any other family.
Yeah, that's the thing with where I'm at too, is we're right by my in-laws. When the kids were a lot younger and I would be traveling, my wife would be working, they're 2 miles away, pop right over and away they go. So we can, it is nice when you have that family around to be able to help you continue to work without having to worry about, who's watching my kids and stuff.
Well, we had both the pro and the con. That the first house my wife and I had when we got married was literally 2 miles from my parents' house. So it was less than a 5-minute drive between houses. So and being that close to in-laws has its own set of challenges too.
Yeah. See, the thing is, and not to get into family history, but my parents are interesting. Her parents, she feels that way about her parents, but and I'm not trying to insult my parents, but
no, of course not.
My in-laws are great. I love them to death. I would do anything for them. They accepted me when my wife and I started dating and I went over to meet them, leather jacket, long hair, goatee going. It was interesting, especially considering her mother is very conservative. So it was very, they just didn't bat an eye. So it was great.
Long hair and goatee, that would be horrible, wouldn't it, DJ?
Well, it's her uncle or great uncle was a priest. And the first thing he says to me is, Jesus, my boss. I'm like, all right. If the priest accepts me, I think I'm good.
I could probably find a picture that would support that in my life as well. Maybe 15 pictures that would support that in my life as well. That's why I've always been short hair, clean cut, mainly for 2 reasons. One is just my aesthetic, and number 2, I'm incapable of anything else. So I went 4 months without a haircut, and it wasn't much longer than what you see right now. So, my hair just gets to be a couple inches and then just stops.
Yeah, well, I cut my hair a long time ago. In fact, it was before we got married. So, but it was high school through college. Those were my long hair days, and then I supposedly got respectable. So,
when did that happen?
I'm still waiting for it, truthfully, but I like to say it because people believe it. So until they get to know me.
Classic. So, Andy, talk to us about the book. Why not? We can jump to that.
Yeah, sure. So about 6 years ago, I published grab a fun copy here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah. I don't have the whole shelf in frame. I do much like DJ Occupational Hazard have the shelf of books in the background there. But I published it's with Pack Publishing, so it's still out there, and you can also find it on my website or Amazon or anywhere else. But it's a little dated at this point in time. So it was about 6 years ago I published ZenApp 7.5 Desktop Virtualization Solutions. I will say this: it is still relevant in a lot of ways. because the first half of the book goes through the thought process and the decision-making process for VDI solutions. So, and most of that has not changed, which comes back to, my earlier point of, finding solutions, not so much technology. So the solution methodology and the thought process is relatively timeless. That doesn't change. Which technology we use or exactly how we deploy it, those things change with time. But what we deploy, may change. Why we deploy it doesn't necessarily change. But the funny story about the book, or a couple of ones I should say, is I would say it started off as a bucket list item. I'd been doing a bunch of reviews and edits for Pact for a couple of years. I guess they found me from a blog, or who knows at the time. Maybe they'd reached out and I'd done a couple things, a couple edits, so I would be willing to write the book. Originally, it was going to be on 6.5 architecture. So we started that, and then I shifted jobs, so that kind of delayed, and then resumed, and then shifted jobs again, so I created another delay. And then, Citrix had announced 7.5 was going to be coming out, the early announcements. And so, I went back to the publisher and said, look, because originally, for anybody that doesn't recall, the 7.0 architecture was strictly desktop. There was no app publishing or server publishing. It was strictly desktop. So Zen Desktop 7 was just that. So 7.5, they start layering back in some of the Zen app features. And so I went back to the publisher. I said, look, instead of doing a 6.5 book, which was probably about 75% complete at the time, let's retool this for 7.5. And because most of it was process-based, it wasn't that huge of a change. So we shifted to 7.5, wrote it for that, and then published it literally the day that 7.6 was released. So, well, which is that's always the challenge when you're doing any sort of tech book is the speed of the product is generally much faster than the speed of publication.
Yeah,
but it was a fun experience. I've had some people ask me if I would update it or do another one. If asked, I mean it is surprisingly time consuming. I'm sure DJ you can attest to that too. It took me all said and done about 18 months. Probably should have taken 6 months, but like I said, there were some artificial delays in there and some motivation delays too. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it's not all on career changes. Sometimes I just didn't want to do my homework. I mean, it happened for us grown-ups too. I didn't want to write my book report. I don't want to do a chapter on MCS. I want to.
That's true.
But it was a very neat process though of learning the publication side of things with. With layout and formatting and some of the nuances of the English language, which, I've always considered myself a student in that, but when you're publishing, you have to consider different things. Yes. Even common phrases like, something being in the wheelhouse. And the editors are looking at it going, yeah, I know what that means. You know what that means, but not everybody's going to know what that means. So try not to use as many colloquialisms or things like that people aren't going to understand.
Yeah. In fact, for this book that's coming out, actually it's out on Amazon right now, actually. But yeah, same kind of thing. I actually chose an editor that did not live in the United States just to get that additional perspective. And I'm finding it's throwing people from the United States off somewhat. It's just like, is this you kind of thing?
Yeah. So
that's true. You have to.
Absolutely. And that was some of the back and forth I had because Pact is based out of the UK, and then a lot of their editorial and acquisition staff are based out of India. And so with a lot of, you kind of get some of that, UK English versus American English back and forth, and not just spellings of, Z's versus S's, but it just some of the phrasings and there were some things where, you pick your battle. Some things you go, no, people are going to understand this because sometimes they worry it was too jargony. I'm like, no, but that's very specific to what we're talking about here. Sometimes you have to have the jargon because that's what you're communicating with. Other times it's understanding, well, there's another way to phrase it. So there's a balancing act. It was kind of harks back to you were asking about career path. So when I was in college, I was an intern for Toyota. So there's the Toyota motor manufacturing plant in Georgetown, Kentucky, which is where the Camry is made.
Oh, right. That's right. Okay.
And so I had a internship there. They do a lot of college internships, or they call it their co-op program. And you do it ultimately for 3 semesters, and you get college credit for it and everything else. And that's actually where I first learned Access. So it's a little bit of a tangent. Do you mind if I go down it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're here for it. We're the THRIVEcast tangent.
So I had applied for this, and they did a whole cattle call because it was about an hour and a half from where my college was. So they did a whole cattle call of people. They had people from all over the country that signed up for this and interview. So a day-long interview process where you go through different people. And I ultimately interviewed with 2 different groups. I interviewed with the IT group, and then I interviewed with a group called Stamping Maintenance, which I had no idea what that was at the time. But stamping that's the heavy press, is where they make the body parts. So that's where they stamp the metal. And it was the maintenance team for that, which I felt was kind of an odd group to interview with. But hey, I'm there. I interviewed with everybody. And I didn't hear anything for probably 8 weeks or so, I guess, is the process. And at the time, just by coincidence, I drove a Toyota. So I got a call one day from, this is Scott from Toyota. And I'm thinking it's the Toyota dealership trying to get me to, trade in the car or come in for maintenance. And honestly, I'm in college. I'm only half listening to the guy, halfway blowing him off, halfway listening. We've all been on calls like that. And he goes, so what if you want to come work here? And that woke me up. I was like, oh, wait, okay, who are you again? Can you start over? So they said, the stamping maintenance group wants to bring you in on the internship. So I was like, well, okay, great. I wanted IT because I was into computers, but that's fine. Whatever. It's working for Toyota. It should be fun. And so Toyota, it's a great program. I don't know if they still do it, but because they would have all the college co-ops get together. So they did it almost like a new hire training. And then they did dinners, and they did like games and activities, and with all the college kids. So you got to know other people your age that were in the same program there to help integrate into Toyota. And then they had mentors at Toyota that kind of guided you through, that were the actual employees. So I get there, my first meetings with all the college guys, and there's a group of about 10 that are in IT. There's lonely old me and stamping maintenance. And like, oh yeah, we got IT. It's great. Yeah. Oh, maintenance. What's that? And I was like, yeah, I have no idea what's going on. Well, I quickly learned the advantage of being the big fish in the small pond versus being just another fish. Because the reason why stamping maintenance wanted to bring in someone like me is they were looking for basically their own shadow IT department.
Okay.
I was the IT department for stamping maintenance, is how that became. We've all dealt with shadow IT. There's pros and cons to it. Because they had a guy who actually was from the same college as me, who'd been doing access programming for them. And that's really what they wanted to bring me in, because it was from the same school, the same background as this guy who had developed a bunch of stuff for them. And I unfortunately do not remember the guy's name, but they say, hey, Andy, here's John. We want you to learn from him. He's going to be here for 2 more months, so just sit here and learn. Be a fly on the wall, shadow him. And so he showed me the basics of Access, and I started playing around with it. And basically, my homework was to learn Access for 2 months, and I could shadow him. And then it grew beyond that. But what I really took away from Toyota that was interesting, because we talk about the international publishing and using offshore, the management of Toyota, and I don't know if it's this way everywhere, but it was at this plant, is they had all of the management staff were American. And then they had what was called a supervisor, a Japanese counterpart that was technically on the same level as they were, although naturally they always won if there was a debate on something. But the idea is, I guess they found out with working multinational corporations, it's always better to have basically local people as the official management, with the corporate resources from Japan providing guidance. And so they wanted to do what's called a startup production plan for the Avalon, which was a minivan at the time that was going to be coming off the plant. And their startup production plan was basically a giant flow chart made in Excel, printed on a blueprint plotter. So like a large, I think it was like an E5, whatever the sizes were, but a large blueprint style poster production plan is what it was. And they had a bunch from years past that were samples that, could work from. And I would say this, it definitely, because this was before Visio, and I think even
Oh,
before
okay.
Publisher. So there weren't really good tools to do this. We're still trying to almost do graphical flows in Excel, pushed Excel to the boundaries, basically. I mean, the size and, nudging and pushing. It was a fun project. They're like, here, we want you to do this. I'm like, okay. I'm your IT guy here in this department. So, but what was interesting is spent, probably 2 days building out this flowchart and sheet. They printed off the first draft on big, large draft size paper, took it to the supervisor or took it to the manager. He's like, well, take it over to the supervisor. He'll review it. And so he looked at this giant blueprint, kind of just skimmed over it, went back to the beginning and made one mark and handed it back to me. I was like, oh, okay. So I made that change. I printed again. He took the whole thing, scanned it, made one more mark, gave it back to me. And I quickly learned the very big difference between, say, an American style and a Japanese style with correction. With Toyota and Japan has, and I've since studied a lot more on it because it was very fascinating. They have their Kanban method, if you're familiar with that, but it's small incremental changes. So where I'm used to, say, giving a term paper or design plan, or whatever the case may be, and having it edited and red lines and marks all the way through. And then I go back and make all the changes and have it reviewed again. That's what I was used to seeing. No, this method was one change at a time. You go until you find a problem, then you fix that problem. And then you go till you find the next problem. So it took about 3 more days of edits and probably 50 reprints to get to the final solution. But it definitely changes how you look at things. Using offshore editors changes, I found that working with people with English as a second language has greatly sharpened my writing and communication skills.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even, going back to my college days, when I was in college, I had I was looking for just a small, on-campus job, and they needed lab instructors it was in the education department for, they call it computer literacy or computer, I forgot exactly, software literacy or something like that. It was basically Office. It started off actually with like WordPerfect and Quadro Pro and Paradox, and eventually switched over to Word, Excel, and Access and PowerPoint. But the idea was just, it's Office applications. And for College of Education. And so I go in there and 19 at the time, maybe 19. Of course, I know everything at 19. I'm in there. I teach this class, I teach this lab. I'm just teaching them how to use these applications. Not a problem. So I go in there. I'm like, okay, well, just move your mouse and click on this. Hand shoots up. What's a mouse?
Hello, computer. Yeah.
Well, look at the monitor. What's the monitor? And so after kind of those first 2 lessons, because again, this was, early mid 90s. Mm-hmm. So, not everybody grew up with computers. And with it being in College of Education, there were quite a few career changes going back 10 years older than me and had never used a personal computer before. So it made me step back and, break things down to the smallest level, because we sometimes assume people have a baseline of knowledge.
Right.
Now, obviously, the difference between, there's also a challenge that you never want to be condescending to someone either, whether you're teaching, whether you're consulting, or even just day-to-day life. Because not everybody's experiences are the same as ours. And that lesson has carried me forward with how I communicate, really across the board, but especially in the business sector. Because knowledge transfer is such an important part of consulting as well, whether that is in the documentation or just in the daily interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing you mentioned writing. This was brought up to me recently too, that in consulting, there's a language we use that's very much, we're often prescriptive in some areas, descriptive in others. But sometimes in writing for a general audience, sometimes you have to be cognizant of that and be aware that you're writing in a different way when you're writing to, say, like a book, for example. You have to shift your language quite a bit and be a little less consultant-like, I guess you could say, like a little less um, protective, I guess. We tend to make our statements very careful in terms of, well, you could do this, but we're not guaranteeing a result, that sort of thing. You have to sometimes be a different approach with people, because they'll just say, well, you haven't told me what to do yet, that sort of thing. So
it's definitely a challenge because, with consulting, I know we've all been there, is that you have the challenge of, it's almost like the Matrix with Morpheus there of, I can show you the path, or knowing the path and walking the path are two different things. And that's what I tell a lot of customers, because a lot of what we do in IT, at least, is a business decision. And so customers will say, tell me what to do. I'll say, I can't. I will tell you what I would do. I would tell you what I recommend. And so a lot of times I'll say, if this were my environment, this is what I would do. But it's not. Right. Because it's their butt in the chair, it's not yours. And so that's part of the challenge of being a consultant is, we're not, we may be brought in because we're the subject matter expert, but at the end of the day, it's their butt that's on the line. Should things not work or things go wrong. And I've been on both sides of that equation. So
right.
But you're right. But writing is very different because someone's reading it, because they, a lot of times we're reading it and tell me what to do, whether it's a blog article, whether it's a book, I didn't ask you to help me understand the problem. I just want it to work. So tell me what to do to make it work. And sometimes we have to do that too. But you're right. Writing is definitely a different challenge in how you communicate, because it's not point specific for an audience. It's a broader scale. So you have to make it, a broader focus in how you write and how you communicate.
Yeah. Right. And I think that goes with, with consulting is a lot of times you get the techie in as a consultant. And, like DJ and I have talked about, I'm sure, Andy, you've seen this and experienced it, is we are not necessarily the best people to be talking to executives, because we love the detail. We love the techie side of things. And when you're getting up to talking to that level of people, it's a whole different language, essentially, because they don't want the details. They want the business impact, how, money, those types of things, and having to learn those skills. It's, same thing with writing. If you're writing a blog for a tech, that's one thing. If you're writing a blog, like you said, for a general audience, it's completely different. You're absolutely correct.
Well, and that's a great point, because that's a challenge I've seen, or we've all seen really throughout career, is, knowing your audience, because their message is going to be different, because the engineer wants to know how to do it. Yep. The architects and the directors generally want to know, kind of why you're doing it a certain way. And the sponsors, the executives want to know what's the outcome, what's in it for us, what's the value proposition. That's something I've heard many times throughout. What's the value prop? Okay, if I want to spend, $50,000 in consulting, whatever the number is, what's my return on investment? What am I getting back? Is the system going to be more efficient? Is it going to be more functional? And that's where you get into soft costs, which is a hard thing to do, because financial modeling, it gets tricky, because you can just about make anything a soft cost if you want to. I mean, you got to be careful about inflating things, but there is a time value of money, and that's this isn't meant to toot my horn. It's just acknowledgement of that. That's the reason why I have my MBA. That's why I went back to graduate school.
Okay.
Because at the time, I don't really advertise a whole lot because it doesn't come up in regular conversation. But that was actually the specific reason why I did that. I remember one of my good friends he's actually a Microsoft MVP in application development in Azure, and one of my best friends from college. He was pushing me, going, "Hey, why are you going back to grad school? Why are you getting your MBA? You don't really need that. Just, get your top level certs and maybe get into the MVP program. And that's all you need to do. And it's like, yeah, well, that's great from a technical perspective. I said, I want to be more than just the tech guy. Yep. Like I need to be able to, and I've always tried to straddle that line between business and technology. To try to speak to both sides of that conversation. So that way I'm comfortable sitting down with, the CFO or the CEO, as well as with the, in the chair admin. And it's always easy to do. And the problem I have, even, in my current role as president of Cloud9, I am still a geek at heart. I mean, I'm still I have a lab here in my house. I have a basement lab. Like I'm sure, most of us geeks do. They have some form of lab. And that's what one of my engineers was talking about today. Is like, how many company presidents have their own lab? Because I was talking about lab and something up to verify. I was like, I'm still an engineer. I'm still a geek, and I always will be. That's the hard part. And that's one thing that with my board, my leadership team. I mean, like, you stop making spreadsheets, Andy. You don't need to be making spreadsheets and doing the analysis. You need to have other people do the analysis. And that's always been my Achilles heel. I don't know about you guys, but my biggest weak point is delegation. Because if I know I can do it, and again, without trying to be egotistical, if I can do it faster, better, cheaper, quicker, whatever the case may be, pick your superlative, that just soon do it and get it done with. Then spend 2 or 3 times longer for someone else to do it and then correct it. But on the flip side, that's also how other people learn. So I mean, there's a balance. It's just my own personal Achilles heel is that I really should do less tech than I do, but it's hard to not roll up your sleeves. It's hard
when you have that love of something that you love to do. It can be very hard to let that go. My wife is always astounded. She's like, you work on a computer all day. You're doing all this stuff. You take a break. And then like at night you go do other stuff on the computer. How can you be on the computer all the time? And it's like, this is what I love. This is enjoyment. I mean, I'm lucky to love what I do. And it is also a hobby that I can do. In that type of thing. So yeah, no, I totally get the letting go piece of it is tough.
Well, and then you run into situations where, say, hypothetically, DJ and I are working on a project and it requires some PowerShell coding. I'm like, oh, does it make more sense? For DJ to have to pick up the PowerShell coding if I already know that, or would it make more sense for him to focus on all the VI components and let me, tinker on the PowerShell in the back end. You're on mute there.
You're on mute, DJ.
That's the classic blunder, isn't it? Wow. I was going to say, Andy, that's never actually happened. That's funny that you came up with that really strange hypothetical situation that has obviously never happened.
It didn't happen 2 years ago. Absolutely hypothetical.
Andy, we should have just let him go. See how long he'd go.
You should have.
Nod to get
oh yeah, that's great.
That's a good point, DJ.
All right. So actually, it's funny. I was actually going to ask a similar question to this, but Tech Guy already asked this question. So he says, being a Citrix admin, do we need to focus on all Citrix products to be a good consultant, like ADC, virtual apps and desktops, et cetera? I feel like I need to learn a lot to be in the market. This is a fantastic question.
Wonderful question. So the answer, so this is going to be first lesson in consulting. Here's the answer. It depends. That's the answer. The answer is always it depends. And I'm sure DJ's heard me say that 1,000 times to people, but and what I mean by that, though, in this case, for my 2 cents on this is it really does depend partially on what you want to be doing, where your comfort level is. Do you want to be a generalist? There's absolutely nothing wrong with, or do you want to be a specialist? I would say I am very much, in the Citrix world, I would say I'm very much an expert on virtual apps and desktops. I know enough to be dangerous on the ADCs. If it's basic, I'll do it. If it's advanced, I would have someone else do it. Mobility for me is more of an academic aspect. I understand the process and the academic and the console, but I would never trust myself to actually touch it. And so I think everybody's going to fall into some sort of spectrum. Generally, I would, assuming your background is in some form of Windows admin, virtual apps and desktops is a great place to start. Knowing that usually there's an ADC involved, you start with one and eventually you pick up others. Just like, we're talking, I started with programming. I didn't start with Citrix. So, a lot of it's going to be a organic growth. It's really where your comfort level is, especially with Citrix deployments. Yes, there is a aspect that you're generally going to have both ADC and apps and desktops in the same deployment. So it's common to have both. But I would say, don't feel you need to boil the ocean, as they'll say, or do everything at the same time. Start with one area, learn it, get comfortable with it. Once you have that foundational knowledge, it's easy to add other components on top. Jeff, what do you think? I know you've been around with multiple companies and different tech stacks. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think, the funny thing is, like, Andy, when you and I were doing Citrix and DJ, I think even for you, we didn't have to worry about a bunch of ancillary products. I mean, at most it was installation manager and resource manager. Metaframe got a little squirrely with some of the video stuff and others, but it was, you were an expert in presentation server, Metaframe, whatever. And as they've expanded, it has become more difficult. Now, I do tend to, in my head, I sort of draw lines, right? I mean, because you bring up ADC. ADC, while it is part of the Citrix portfolio and it is part of their whole infrastructure, it is also very much a networking piece side of things. I agree. If it's basic stuff, yeah, I can figure it out to go in there and get stuff done. When they start talking about the more advanced stuff, I would have to step away. But you're absolutely right, is that, you pick your starting point. And I think the perfect starting point, especially with Citrix, is virtual apps and desktops. I think that's just a natural. The rest of it will follow, and you don't need to be an expert in all of it. You want to have an understanding of it. And I think that's one of the great things about EUC is that it's not just Citrix. You really do want to have an understanding of everything it ties into. And it's not just EUC. It's a lot of different, software technology. You have to know everything around it. Because if you go in and just say, here it is, here's my Citrix, solution for you, and you don't take into effect Active Directory, GPOs, networking, hypervisors, you have to understand them at least at a high level to be able to correctly design and even ask the right questions when you're doing discovery and things like that.
When you're working as a team, especially.
That's what I love about it, is that it's not just Citrix or VMware View or whatever. It's you get to touch and play and learn so much. It's awesome.
And I'll say too, one of the things that I've noticed in the more I've played with different technologies is they have their own type of personality in a sort of way. So, for example, if you're really leaning more towards wanting to be behind the scenes, there's a lot of things you can do with like virtual apps and desktops or things like that in the support spectrum or the engineering spectrum that you don't necessarily have to be interacting with people very often. You can very much just hunker down and figure things out. That's something where focusing on engineering aspects of that is really great. Same thing with NetScaler. If you get into that and you find you really enjoy networking more than you do kind of the somewhat chaotic nature of virtual apps and desktops, and you want to really specialize, well, then go for it. Actually, there's probably, like Andy said, there's more demand for ADC skills right now than I think there are for virtual apps and desktops. In fact, working on a course with someone right now to help get that out. So hopefully in a few weeks. But if that works for you, then great. And if you find that you are enjoying interacting with people, as a lot of administrators that do a lot of service desk calls and things like that, if you're finding you're enjoying that interaction and solving problems from people, that means you might be a good architect down the road, because that's essentially what an architect has to do a lot of, is interface with people and get their use cases and things like that. And so it becomes less technical and more interactive. And so it really depends on your personality and where you best fit in too, is what I would say about that.
In one last thing, I mean, DJ, you and I have talked about this before, and I'm sure I would hope Andy would agree with this. If you don't know something, don't try to pretend that you know something.
Yes.
Simply say, exactly. I don't know. I don't know, but I will find out, or, I will talk to my colleagues. I will get back to you with an answer. We've been down this road. We want to be the experts. We are those people that want to be an expert in everything. It's sort of a OCD, I think, with techies, but it's impossible. Like you find out, there are, just within Citrix, there are a bunch of different products, and they each have their own ins and outs, their quirks, things like that. You're never going to be an expert in everything. You can focus, you can do that, but you're never going to be an expert in everything. And admitting that you don't know something, but you will get back to them, that's the biggest lesson I think you can learn in tech.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Knowing your limitations is critical, because that's where not just mistakes happen, but critical failures happen, is when you know your limitations and you pretend otherwise or exceed them. We all make mistakes. We learn by mistakes. We've all been down those paths, and sometimes they're minor, sometimes they're major. But that's how you learn. It's the best way to learn. But the key thing is to you don't want to compound that by dishonesty, whether it's saying you know something when you don't. There's absolutely no harm in. I mean, I said for a long time, one of the reasons that makes me a good consultant is I don't have all the answers, but I know how to ask the questions. I know how to find the answers. Whether it's Google magic, whether it's calling my buddy Jeff and saying, hey, you've seen this before, what can you help me with? And as far as that goes, there's lots of community forums out there. Slack has a whole lot of them. There's web forums out there. There's places to go and ask and meet people. Early in my career, I never threw away an email address. Anytime I got somebody's email address, woe be them. Because I would ask questions. Doesn't mean everybody would answer, but I would ask the questions, and that's how you grow. And there's a gentleman by the name, I hope I'm saying his last name right. I don't know if you guys know him, Patrick Rouse.
Oh yeah, yep.
So Patrick.
We live in the Detroit area. Yeah. Yeah.
So I knew Patrick years ago. So Patrick, he's been out of the EUC space for a while now, but Patrick was kind of an early blogger / industry expert. He had worked for Quest Software. They had vWorkspace, which got acquired by Dell. When Dell purchased VMware, they shelved they actually spun Quest back off and shelved the vWorkspace product. But anyway, so I remember I was working as just an in-house architect for a company at the time before I became a consultant, and we had Quest come in because we were looking at about once a year, every other year. My CIO would say, hey, Citrix is too expensive. Let's find something else. And at the time, there really were no viable alternatives.
It's like clockwork.
We looked at Workspace. We looked at, I think it was X2 was another one. And there's something from Ericsson for like a web-based remote desktop protocol. There are a couple different ones out there. Just nothing quite fit the bill from a maturity standpoint. But the point was, I would say that the Quest products were the closest to it. And so Patrick actually came out on us as a sales engineer along with the account manager. And they set up a demo for us. And I swear I sat there, I've been to his ear for 2 straight days. Because I'd recognized him from online forums. So we recognized his name. We went out to lunch, we had beers. And I said, what advice do you have? I was like, here I am, kind of as the engineer here. And I'm not quite to the level of wanting to, to be a consultant, but I figured that was my next step up. I said, what advice do you have? And he told me, he goes, Andy, he said, start writing. He goes, start a blog. Because it doesn't matter what you write. He goes, if it's useful to you, it's useful to other people.
Yeah.
That's what the app that you mentioned earlier. That was the whole genesis of that app. Was it was useful to
blog.
Useful to other people. And they I haven't touched base with Patrick in forever, but they I used to keep up because once I got into consulting, we'd cross paths at conferences and so forth. But they as you meet consultants, as you meet industry reps, or I would go to conferences. I would go to, I think DJ and I first met at Bryform once upon a time, but I would go to
in person. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yes, I would go to Microsoft. It used to be Tech Edge. Was it Insight now, or whatever they call it now?
Inspire, something like that.
Inspire, yeah. Microsoft.
Okay, but there's Citrix was iForm, and then became Synergy, and you got VMworld, and all these tech conferences. I would always go, never for the content, always for the networking, to meet the people.
Networking, exactly.
And if there was a session that was of great interest to me, then I would go to the tech session and I would make note of every single person that was speaking on that session and get their contact information, because then when I had questions about that technology, I was emailing them. And one thing is, most people in this industry are happy to answer questions.
Absolutely.
I know, I think most people know Dan Feller. I mean, Dan, I've had email conversations for, I did a lot of work with and for Citrix, going back 10 years, but even before then, Dan and I would chat because he's always happy to answer questions. And that's how most people in the industry are. You meet people. So any way that you can grow your, back to the original question, start with what's best interest to you and grow from there. But ask the questions, ask people, search forums. And you eventually build your own, body of knowledge.
Cool. So I have one more question to go. I know we're kind of approaching the top of the hour here, but I just wanted to see if you got the time. Andy, obviously you're in a position where you are making hiring decisions and things like that in your company. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the qualities of an in-demand consultant versus maybe not so much in demand. What things are you actually looking for?
Well, there's 2 sets of things. We've touched on some of this, but 2 different considerations with consultants. Actually, I'll go 3. So the soft skills are very important. Now, what we do is we're very specialized in the white label, white glove consulting business. So experience is important for what we're doing too. But the first thing, so technical expertise definitely counts. So if we're looking for, say, a VMware Horizon View style, engineer architect, then we're not going to look at, say, a Citrix architect. Now, there may be someone that is both, and that's perfectly fine and not uncommon. But I always start with soft skills. At Cloud9 specifically, we have a resource manager on staff who's a professional recruiter, and we always start there because we start with the business skills, the soft skills, communication. That's everything. Always comes down to communication. We've talked about, just on this call, we've talked about writing styles. We've talked about communication styles, speaking styles, knowing your audience. It always starts with soft skills, because you can be an engineer without soft skills. You can be an in the chair admin and work, 9 to 5, 9 to 9, whatever kind of shifts you work, and be perfectly happy and successful, no problems whatsoever. As a consultant, though, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to speak to people. You have to be able to listen to people, to understand and convert a lot of what they're saying from a business need into a technical need. So I always start with soft skills. The other one, technical skills, I think is pretty self-explanatory. But the third factor, at least for most consultants, and it's changing now because of the state of the world, the third consultant is also the ability to travel. I know many people that, could have been great road warrior, great consultants, but had no desire to be a road warrior.
Yep.
And that's perfectly fine too. And everybody goes through different phases where there's some years that, you might go, 3 or 4 years traveling in and out and having platinum memberships at all the hotel chains and all the airlines, and say, you know what, that's enough, and then look for something else where I'm not looking at you, DJ. And then look at something else where
Should be.
I know.
Yeah, I know from myself. When my kids were younger, I didn't want to travel nearly as much, but now my wife just wants to kick me out all the time. So I'm,
but it's because for me, when the kids were the youngest, was actually some of the easiest times to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had our kids. We have 3 kids, and we had them in close order, so they're all 2 years apart. So when I first started being a true road warrior, the kids were very young. The youngest was in diapers still. So at that time, it was actually a bit easier. When they got older and started getting into school, and you start with multiple activities, that's when it got really hard. And that's when I shifted from doing road travel more toward, back office management. And then as they've gotten older, it's easier for me to travel. Now they're all teenagers, so they don't really need me around, or probably want me around, but you know where that was going to.
They do need, they just don't realize they need.
Yeah. But I mean, that's, and the big things, right now, obviously with, the state of the world with COVID and everything else, no one's really traveling right now. Right. But that's not always going to be the case. And it's not necessarily you have to travel to be a consultant, but that's it. It's a matter of knowing what your limits are. We're talking about knowing your technical limits. Same thing. Same thing is with this is know what your personal limits are. I have some, good consultants that they get sick of people easy. I mean, there's no better way to say it. And, you got to have thick skin to be in this game. You got to be able to, I've gone into multiple companies where they want to blame me for everything. Okay, I can take it. That's what sometimes that's what companies pay a consultant for, is to have someone to blame.
Yep.
I've been on both ends of that.
You and I've done that a lot.
and there's politics that come into play. And I've had multiple occasions where, sometimes it's political aspect. So all that falls back into those soft skills. So if you can learn the technical skills, and obviously, soft skills are learned too. Don't get me wrong. I see DJ threw a link out there for some soft skill with his latest book there. So plugging away, DJ, plug away. But in all seriousness, soft skills are a critical part to what we do. Because you got to manage your expectations, you got to manage people. Sometimes you have to manage feelings. Sometimes it's politics. As consultants, sometimes we're brought in because the management team won't listen to the on-site team, even if they say the exact same things we do. So sometimes we're there to repeat and reinforce messages. I've been other things where management team brought in consultants because they want to do away with their internal team. That can be a touchy situation. Nobody wants to be outsourced or downgraded or removed. And and unfortunately, it is a part of business that happens, and sometimes we touch onto that too. So having a thick skin, is part of those soft skills, and managing people and expectations. Sometimes knowing when to walk away. If someone's, I tell my kids, change the situation. If somebody's, getting on your nerves, remove yourself from the situation. Take a break. Say, well, let's take a bio break. Get a coffee, get a water, take a walk. Say, let me confer with my manager. I always tell people that's on the project, defer back to me. If you're in a pickle, defer back to me or whoever your project manager is. And so, let me confer with Andy on that. And as a manager, sometimes there's situations back in politics where there's just not a good fit. I've had consultants call me say, I can't go back to this customer. It's not a good fit. And I've had customers call me and say, around. Hey, this just isn't working out with this guy. Nothing against him. It's just not working out. I had a situation several years ago, had 2 almost identical projects going on at the same time. Project A, I still think it's working out with this consultant. I don't know what it is. Project B, I don't think it's working out with this consultant. I'm not sure what it is. Flip-flop the consultants to the other projects. Pretty much same project, same consultants, just switch spots. and everybody was happy. I mean, the consultants again learned to roll with it. Like, oh, okay, thick skin, fine, whatever. It's not personal, whatever. They don't like me, I don't care. I'll go to the other job. They,
Yep.
And then you get, then you get the other consultants into the other roles, and customers are happy at that point. They've been listened to, and sometimes that's all they want is to be listened to.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
But and sometimes customers find out in that particular situation, the customer come back to me after everything was done and go, I want to apologize. I think we pulled the plug too soon.
Mhm.
We just didn't quite understand, and didn't feel we were making progress, but now we understand. And so sorry. I was like, it's no big deal. And I tell customers all the time, it doesn't matter why you want to change resources. If you want to make a change, we make a change.
Yeah.
Whether it's personal, political, technical. Obviously, if somebody's messing up, I want to know about it. But it's all part of that soft skill, and it comes down to communication.
Indeed. So one more question. We're going to wrap this up here. We're going to kind of do this as a roundtable kind of thing. So Tech Guy asked, what's the best way to find clients other than networking as a remote contractor?
You mean networking? I mean, I think that is.
I think
So
what he might mean is
define what he means by networking.
I think other than working in networking, I think is what it means there. I'm hoping that's.
Yeah, I'm reading that as just networking with other people.
Oh, maybe that
networking with other people.
We can just go ahead and talk to both, just in case.
Businesses, yeah. I mean, to me, I think the best one is one, getting your name out there. If you're doing independent work, you need to get your name out there so that people recognize it, and hopefully they would then come to you. But along with that is the networking piece of it, participating in community, getting to know people, like Andy said, getting email addresses when you do meet people, or business cards or whatever, so you can always contact them. You can always hit them up, say, hey, you know what? I've got some free time coming up. Got like a month that I'm free. Do you happen to have anything that I could sit in on? When you're independent, I think, one, like I said, getting your name out there, but also that networking with others within your field is critical to that.
Yep. Yeah. So sorry if that isn't what you want to hear, but it's absolutely true. Sometimes you really do have to get out there and get your name out there. It's something and to find opportunities too, because a lot of times what you find, and this is definitely true in more than just the IT world, but it can happen in the IT world too, is looking at job postings can sometimes be a big waste of time. A lot of times, most jobs that I know of, and most things that and just to confirm here, he was talking about networking with other people. So we're going to go ahead and give some guidance here. I'm going to put my coach hat on here and say that the the big thing with finding opportunities is you're going to, as far as the amount of time you spend and the efforts that are involved, networking with other professionals pays off much, much, much more. What you're doing right now is going to pay off more than just doing a job search or something like that. A lot of times, most job postings are a lot of times posted just because they have to. They already have someone in mind. Or a lot of times it is an internal job posting is worth more to a company because they'll find people refer people for two reasons. One, that, if you have a friend, you want to work with your friend, right? You want to see them more. So it naturally is a good fit. And two, it's in a way kind of like an arranged marriage where your friends are already looking out for you. Your network is looking out for you. They're saying, okay, what kind of things do I know that that tech guy is really good at and as really skilled for, or would be a good fit for? And so that effort spreads out the more networking you do. So it really is one of those things where otherwise you're just stuck in the mode of where I was early in my career, where really was just kind of whatever I could find, and I was miserable. It wasn't really until I started letting other people do work for me and finding work, and that's actually how, in a roundabout sort of way, how Andy and I got to know each other. Actually, was through those relationships of letting other people find the work for me, knowing my skill sets, knowing what I was good at, knowing my personality, finding that work. So I haven't had to look for work in well over a decade. I haven't filled out a job application, and I actually don't remember the last job application I actually filled out. It just hasn't been happening that way. It's all been networking. Andy?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Networking is definitely the primary point. Getting to know people, getting to know companies. It's I always joke that with the conferences, I always say it's people you used to work with, people you currently work with, or people you're going to work with. Between the three of us here right now, I mean, there's probably there's probably at least 300 companies that we've touched, either as consultants or as employees or as advisors, and that's just the immediate. That's not even getting into our networks, and so networking is definitely primary. As far as other than that, I think Jeff touched on this community. I'm wearing my my Citrix, my CDGC shirt, the Citrix community. There's VMware has their user group community. There's vmugs. There's different user groups. There's Linux groups. There's database groups. There's user groups for really whatever floats your boat. I know Facebook has a lot of different Citrix groups on it. LinkedIn has a lot of different groups. There's obviously Expert Exchange. The same places where you go to find answers. Sometimes the same place where you want to go in to be part of those answers, and that's how you build. Build that. And as far as finding, actual clients themselves, if you want to do direct contract work, you have the options of working with an organization such as Cloud9 that, where you could subcontract with, and their consulting company. You have different partners that you could contract with. You can also, there are websites out there, and this isn't the area where I play in, so I can't speak with authority on any good sites. I know there are, crowdsourced sites out there where people bid on individual jobs. Companies will throw out. I know they started with programming and it's gone into general IT, but they'll throw out, "Hey, I need this task done."
Yep.
And then you can bid on and say, "Yeah, I can do that task for X number of dollars," and it may be a way to build both your reputation as well as your network.
Yeah. And Jeff and I are working on a wider community. We're hoping to get that going within the next maybe even within the next few weeks if there's enough interest for it. But we are building out a community that is non-technically focused for technical people. In end user computing in general, it's more of a grab bag of stuff and less of, "Hey, I'm having this problem," whatever. It's much more of focusing on your career and things like that. Specifically for Citrix, though, I will say that I do have a community right now. The Citrix Hero community is free to join. community.citrixhero.com. Sorry, you know what? I got the wrong link there. No, that's right. Sorry. Or just go to ctxpro.com for the link there if that doesn't work for any reason. But so that's good for that. So I think we're to last words territory. So Andy, last thoughts.
No, just thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it. Enjoy the format and the cast here. So looking forward to seeing you.
Absolutely. Thanks a bunch. Jeff.
Yeah, last words. I always say I don't have any, and then I end up on a diatribe or something. So, no, I again appreciate Andy being on. Like I said, he and I have known each other for quite a while now. Always good to be able to chat with him. And DJ, it's good to be back.
Yeah, right. Jeez, we had a little bit of a scare there, and
yeah. And just for everybody to know, it was the first week I was gone. I was sick. Thought possibly had COVID, had to get tested. And then last week I had to take my dad in for a small heart procedure, which actually from a tech standpoint is so fascinating.
Yeah.
What they did to get in the heart and what they did. It just blows my mind. So I won't.
And like technology, sometimes the results have been fantastic. So that's great.
Yeah. It's like the Grinch, where his heart grew. He was like grumpy when he went in, and then he's happy and joyous when he came out.
We like to see it. All right. Well, thanks for being with us again, my friend.
Yes, good to be back.
All right, folks. Well, that's it for us. Like we mentioned, I will mention that this week we released the first part on Kindle of Just Do This, a simpler way to succeed in IT. You can actually get a copy of this. If you're viewing this right now, you can get this for 99 cents because this is something I'm doing kind of as a celebration, which is kind of unheard of. But part one of this book for 99 cents, it.justdothis.net/Kindle1 to get the copy of that. You can get that for 99 cents. So go ahead and do that. The reason I'm doing that for 99 cents, just full disclosure, is I want to see a bestseller status on this one. I want to see this really climb up. So honestly, this is a labor of love for the last 3 years, detailing about 20 years worth of what Andy and I were talking about as far as soft skills. Yeah, this is where I've kind of laid all these out and saying, here's the things you really need to know to survive in IT services specifically. So feel free to grab that. We'll have the print version coming out in, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, depending on some logistics we're working on there. We're almost done. Just this close, but I appreciate your support in that, and just hope you're successful at it, because it's really something that we want to put out there for your success. And as always, thank you for joining us this week, and we will see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. I believe we have Mr. Benjamin Krill on for next week. Tech Guy bought it. Awesome. So we will see you next week for another THRIVEcast. Have a great day, folks.